Hello, everybody. Michael, the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. I have watched the latest episode of The Mandalorian, Episode 5, The Gunslinger is what it's called, which came out on the 6th of December, Friday the 6th of December, and I am finally ready to share my thoughts about the episode. I will say off the top, I felt like this was a pretty strong episode. I think of the first five, my favorite is still episode 3, The Sin. I think that's been the strongest so far. But this episode, I think, is actually my next favorite. I think this was actually really good and actually advances the plot in new ways. It still doesn't reveal a bunch of information that I was hoping for, and who knows how long they'll drag that along. That's serialized TV, I guess. But in the meanwhile, new things happen in this episode that is definitely enough to keep up the intrigue, to keep things really interesting. The people who are making this show know how to tell a story in a way that keeps you interested, even if you have nagging questions. You know, I'm the type of person that, like, nagging questions really bother me after a while in shows, but if you can keep me interested from episode to episode, then I tend to be okay with it. So, and this episode does a good job of that. It had me intrigued. So this episode starts out with the Mandalorian and the child, the yodeling, flying away from the planet Sorgan from the last episode, and they're getting chased down by a bounty hunter who has one of those trackers who's trying to track the child, and they have a space battle, which is the first time I think in this show that we've seen space combat. And this bounty hunter get in a sort of a little dogfight with the Razor's Crest, and the Mandalorian is able to do some clever fighting and basically blow that bounty hunter's ship up. In sort of a cool little sequence, but the Mandalorian ship gets damaged in the process, and he has to land on this nearby planet in order to have it repaired, because it can't really go anywhere. And when he starts to land on the planet, you actually find out that he is on Tatooine. He's nearing Tatooine, and he lands his ship in Mos Eisley Spaceport and encounters a character called Peli, who is played by Amy Sedaris, and she's sort of a repair person, like a pit boss, and she has all these pit droids that help her repair ships. And of course, the Mandalorian doesn't want any droids to touch his ship, but he pays her some money to get the job going of fixing his ship, and then says he'll get more. And he goes off to the cantina to look for some work so he can get her some money and help repair his ship. When he's in the cantina, which looks like a pretty familiar cantina, if you ask me, looks like one that we've seen before in some other Star Wars property, he goes in there to try to find himself a job and see if there's anybody around. Interestingly, one of the things that I think is really interesting is this cantina, the barkeep in this cantina is a droid, and there's a lot of droids in there, and one that's actually running the bar. And if it is in fact the same bar from A New Hope, you remember back in the Imperial days, droids were not allowed in the cantina whenever that, Han Solo and Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker and everybody was there. The droids had to stay outside. In this one, there's a droid, in this era, there's a droid behind the bar running the whole cantina, so I thought that was kind of interesting. He encounters another bounty hunter in there. He asks the droid behind the bar if he knows of any work or whatever, and it's not something that they talk about a lot in that particular cantina of bounty hunter work, but there's a guy sitting basically in the Han Solo chair, or what's supposed to evoke very much that moment with Han and Greedo and all that stuff. And he's got his legs propped up on the table just the same, and it's this bounty hunter named Toro, I think. And Tono or Toro? It's Toro. It's Toro, and he says, "Hey, I got a job, and it's dangerous and all that stuff, but it offers money." And he says they're looking for a assassin, an assassin called Fennec Strand, who is a mercenary that's worked for all the known crime syndicates in the galaxy, including the Hutts, and she's a high-priced bounty and dangerous because she's a very skilled assassin. And this guy is kind of new to bounty hunting. He's trying to make it. We find that out. The Mandalorian kind of agrees to go with him on this job. And we find out that this guy's kind of new, and he wants to make a name for himself in the Bounty Hunters Guild. He's not actually a guild member yet, and he thinks that this will help him get some renown. So he wants the Mandalorian to help him on the job, and the Mandalorian agrees for the money. And they go hop on to some dewbacks and ride out into the wilds of Tatooine, the desert. They encounter some Tusken Raiders, of course, and in an interesting... No, I'm sorry, they don't ride out on dewbacks. I just remembered. I had this written down. They ride out on speeder bikes, and they encounter some Tusken Raiders when they're sort of checking out this one ridge. The Tusken Raiders, just like as you've seen them in other Star Wars properties, they kind of pop up and get ready to fight people. They're very aggressive. They don't want people on their land. But in an interesting little scene, the Mandalorian actually interacts with them through using this sign language, and for the first time that I know of in Star Wars lore, you actually see Tusken Raiders do stuff other than yell at people and try to fight them. He agrees to trade Toro's binoculars for passage through the Tatooine, or the Tusken Raiders' land. And then they ride their speeder bikes to a spot where they see this dewback that's dragging along a body across the desert, and it's just sort of walking along, sort of like in the Westerns when you see a horse with a dead rider, a derelict horse in the desert. It's exactly like that, except it's a dewback. And when they approach it to investigate it, they see it's got one of those tracking beeper things, and they realize that they've walked into a trap where they're sort of out in this exposed valley or dry lake bed that's in between these two dunes, these two ridges, and they're being sniped at by their assassin that they're tracking. So they run up and dive behind another ridge and try to formulate a plan. And the Mandalorian, who is more experienced, sort of takes the lead and says, we're going to have to wait until nighttime so that we have... we're not as obvious riding across this open desert, and then we'll try to go get her. And the guy's like, well, how come she'll stay there? And he's like, because she's going to outweight us because she's an assassin and all that stuff. So they have this sort of showdown where they try to shoot at each other from each ridge and stuff, and then night falls, and they try to get the element of surprise on her by riding up their speeder bikes in the night. She's able to shoot the Mandalorian speeder bike, so it doesn't really work anymore, so then they only have one functional one, but the two of them are able to get the jump on this assassin, Fennec, and sort of put her in cuffs and everything. We find out, actually, that she's played by Ming-Na Wen, who is a great actor in a lot of action stuff. She's been in like 6 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. As Agent May, and she was the voice of Mulan in the original Mulan. Anyway, she's a great actor, and she does a really good job as a bounty hunter in this. They're thinking about how to transport her back to get paid for their bounty, but they only have one speeder bike, so they realize that they're going to have to go find that dewback that was dragging the guy around so they can have the speeder bike and the dewback. And Toro tells the Mandalorian that he has to go for it because this is his bounty and he's not leaving her alone and all that stuff. And so he does. He begrudgingly goes to go fetch the dewback. While he's gone, Fennec gets into Toro's ear and tries to convince him, like, hey, she's already heard word, even on Tatooine, that the Mandalorian had issues on his planet where they, all the bounty hunters went at he turned on the bounty hunters guild and all that stuff. Word has already made it to her. and she tells him that, you know, the child that he has with him, if, you know, they can find it, is a high price bounty. It's worth money and all that stuff. And, you know, she kind of tries to convince him, like, you should be going after the Mandalorian instead of me. We find out also when she's talking about all that, that the planet that the Mandalorian was originally on, where all of the other Mandalorians were, and he was getting his jobs and stuff, where Werner Herzog's guy was, is a planet called Navarro. So we did figure out the name of that planet in this episode. They kind of dropped that information in there. So you're kind of wondering what Toro is going to do, whether or not he's going to believe her or not. And actually, he shoots Fennec in the chest, and she slumps over to the ground. And then he decides to leave her there, and that he's going to go back for the child in Mos Eisley. So when the Mandalorian gets back, he sees that she's just there on the ground, and kind of puts two and two together and leaves her there as well, and goes back to Mos Eisley. When he gets there, Toro is where the ship is with the mechanic lady Pelly and the child. She was taking care of the child. I forgot to mention that. He left. He paid her money to leave the child with her, so she'd watch over the child, the yodeling. And when he gets back, when the Mandalorian gets back, he has both of them hostage and puts him into handcuffs. But the Pelly is smart enough to have those handcuffs rigged, and is able to help the Mando out by giving it, like, helping him explode out of these handcuffs and have an element of surprise. And they have like a little struggle there, a sort of a little fight in this little contained room, and the Mando actually blasts Toro, and looks like he's pretty much taken out by the end of this episode. And then he's able to get his ship fixed. He's able to pay. He pretty much gives all of the money that was for that one bounty, which is a huge chunk. He gives it all to Pelly for helping him out and watching the child and everything. And she kind of gives him a little bit of parenting advice in a couple scenes that's really funny, because she's like, you're just leaving this kid around with people and like paying him to do it or whatever. And there's like some interesting stuff where she kind of echoes some of the things that we might be feeling as an audience member. Like, you're playing a little fast and loose with this kid, knowing that it's a high price bounty. On the other hand, maybe he has confidence in the child because he's seen its force abilities and stuff like that. Who knows? Anyway, the Mando's able to get his ship repaired and get ready to take off Tatooine. There is a little coda at the end of this episode where we actually cut back to Fennec's body in the desert where she was left by Taro and the Mando. And there are footsteps that you hear approaching, and you see some boots approach the body, and then it fades to credits. So we don't know who those boots belong to necessarily yet. We also don't know if Fennec is actually dead or not. My money is on not, but it's hard to say at this point, or who those person are. I'm assuming we'll find out in the next episode what's going on with all of that. But that's what happens pretty much in this episode. As I said before, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was some of my small criticisms from the other episode about it not being sort of connected enough to the rest of answering, questions about the meta-narrative of Star Wars and all that stuff. This sort of threw me a little bit of a bone by having familiar locations, by setting this episode on Tatooine, and by giving us some more information that we didn't have yet, like the name of the planet that we started off with being Navarro and stuff. Like, some of the things that were irking me were not just, well, give me the mystery of the child and the yodeling. Like, I know that's a major plot point that they're not going to probably reveal until the end. And even, stuff about the Mandalorian and where he comes from. I know that's going to come in time, and they're not just going to reveal it in every episode. So I'm not that upset that that's happening. But, like, for a long time, for the first 4 episodes, they weren't telling us anything. Like, the names of planets and the names of certain characters and stuff. Like, it's just, and even now it's like we still don't know, like, is the child ever going to have a name? Is the Mandalorian ever going to have a name? Those things would really help. And this episode, threw me a little bit of a bone by being like, "Oh, Tatooine is a place I know. I know what to call that. I know what Mos Eisley and what some of these places are." And then to also be like, "Oh, the Mandalorian split town on the planet Navarro." They're starting to fill in some of these details slowly but surely, while also giving you new stuff and new locations and interesting individual episodes. And this episode, I feel like, really achieved a balance that hasn't happened in some of the other episodes, particularly the last one. And I really enjoyed this one. I kind of hope the Fennec, the Ming Na Wen character, is still alive because A, I really like her as an actor, and B, I'm kind of interested in the monkey wrench she might throw into things. And it also seems like there's a little element of if she stays alive, the Mandalorian kind of going through the galaxy and creating enemies and allies basically everywhere he goes, and that could set up for like an interesting showdown towards the end, where all the people that are on his tail and that he's annoyed, and all the people that along the way that he's helped and have helped him, could potentially come back into play at any point during this series. And that's an interesting thing that they're spending some time building it, knowing that there's going to be another season and stuff like that. And that aspect of it, I don't mind. I don't mind that things are going slowly. I just, throw me a bone here and there. That's all I'm asking for. And this episode really does that. So thumbs up to The Gunslinger, episode 5 of The Mandalorian. Really cool to see this one. And that's pretty much The Mandalorian for the week. I hope that this was informative and entertaining, interesting to you. If you have any comments of your own, please let me know down below. Thanks, as always, for watching these and for subscribing to my channel and seeing what my thoughts are on The Mandalorian. I'll be back next week when the new content is released on the 13th. The new episode of The Mandalorian and new Disney Plus original stuff, and to give all my thoughts and impressions then. So until then, have an excellent week, have a magical one, and thanks as always for watching. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.